folks in, and then we'll record. All right. Good morning and welcome to TAO's next session of our Member Resiliency series with State Rep Julie Fahey. I'm Kara Snow, the Chief Community Engagement Officer at the Technology Association of Oregon. Couple of rules of engagement as we start. All participants are muted. Please remain on mute unless a TAO staff member unmutes you and calls on you to talk. You may ask or respond to questions in the chat box publicly or privately by directing your message to Ruthie Ditzler. We will monitor the chat box and respond throughout the discussion. We will ask you all to engage via the participant icon on your screen. Please engage with us on social during the call and throughout the day. We appreciate all the social support, and you can see where to find us on social on the slide. Due to our limited time, we capture all questions in the chat and shift any unanswered ones into Mobilize, our member engagement platform. Mobilize is TAO's member-only virtual community, and we will post unanswered questions from our members there to keep the conversation going after the event. If you have questions about joining Mobilize, please reach out to Justin Martinez, whose email is also on the screen. If you have questions about joining TAO, please reach out to membership@techoregon.org. TAO staff support is provided by Ruthie Ditzler, who's happy to take feedback, questions, comments, or discuss sponsorship opportunities. A really big thank you to Portland State University for underwriting this series. We appreciate their sponsorship and support. Please join us on Wednesday, July 29th, for the next of our Resiliency series featuring Nathan Webster, CEO and founder of NW and Associates. NW stands for Nathan Webster, not Northwest. He will be talking about resiliency in the community and joining us from Vancouver, Washington. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Representative Julie Fahey. Julie is the co-chair of the Oregon Future Caucus. She has 20 years of experience in the private sector as a business consultant and co-founder of a human resources consulting firm for businesses and nonprofits. Through her work, she helps employers pay their employees fairly, build skilled workforces, and make their organizations great places to work. Thank you very much for joining us today, Rep. Fahey. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
We are really, really glad you're here. I'm going to jump right into these questions. So it's exciting, I think, because I think you and I are similar age, and it's really cool to interview an elected that is on the younger side and potentially a different generation than we tend to see. So with that in mind, what inspired you to run for elected office?
Well, it really started in 2009, actually. I had a friend recommend to me a program called Emerge Oregon that trains Democratic women to run for office. And, you know, it's not that I'd never thought about running for office, but it was always kind of a, someday maybe sort of thing. And I didn't come from the political world. I was a business consultant. So I didn't really know what it would look like to run a campaign and everything it would involve. So I went through this training program, which was about 6 months of kind of learning the nuts and bolts of campaigning, and then just gradually started to get more involved in my local community in local politics. And then the seat that I ran for in 2016 became an open seat, and I just really thought through, is the state legislature a place where I feel like my perspectives and my experience will make a difference? And as someone who is very data oriented and really has sort of a scientific method approach to problem solving, that I have a chemistry degree and then, have spent my career working with businesses to help them through their problems related to human resources and their people. I just thought that my perspective on public policy would be something that I could bring a new perspective to the legislature.
That's awesome. And do you still, so 4 years in, do you still feel the same way?
I do. I think I've built kind of a reputation for being someone who likes to say, show me the data, right? If you're coming to me with a problem that the legislature needs to work on and fix, tell me. I think stories about are great, but I also want to know about the data, and I want to know how other states have solved this problem, because, one of the great things about being 50 states and the way that we've set up our government is you can look at all these other, Oregon is unique in some ways, but we all are facing challenges around housing and healthcare and education issues. So there's lots of other examples to look to. So I do think that general approach to problem solving is something that I've built a reputation in the legislature for having, and that is really sort of effective, not just in passing legislation, but also in sort of bridging the gap across the aisle.
I love that. It's I'm sure something that's really appreciated too by our tech community and our business leaders. When you talk about data-driven business, it's interesting to hear about data-driven policy. And much like I promised, my dog is barking. So a question going back to 2016, when you first joined the legislature, was there anything about it that surprised you? You've gone through this class, you learned about campaigning, you had your policy perspective, you come out of business. Like, what was your big surprise?
I think just the extent to which, they say politics is about relationships, and I had heard that, but I don't think I fully took it on until I was actually in the legislature. The importance of relationships and of your own reputation and of process in actually getting a bill passed. So it's not just whether or not you have a good policy. I could go into my office and shut the door and come up with a great solution to a problem about manufactured housing. And I could come out and say, here's my idea, I'm going to fix this problem. And that's not enough. You really need to build support through, outside coalitions. You need to bring your colleagues along in convincing them that this is a good idea. Oftentimes that involves a lot of process, work groups where you bring stakeholders together and hash out the pros and cons of something. All 90 of us, there's 90 people in the Oregon legislature, and it's a part-time job. We cannot all be experts on every issue that comes in front of us. We all have our areas of specialty. And so if there's someone working on an issue that I don't have, natural resources is an area that I don't spend a lot of time in. So I know who the people are that I trust in natural resources. And if they come to me with a bill, I know to ask them questions, but I can rely on their judgment and their policy making. And so getting a bill passed is much more than just having the right policy. It's building the right relationships. It's, you personally having a reputation where other people trust you and trust your work. And it's kind of what process you follow to get it done.
I love that. That's such a good answer. And it is a surprise when you get there. It's not just like, wait, I don't just get to throw a bill there and then it becomes law. All right, so we're going to shift a little bit. So I'm going to have you tell us about the Oregon Future Caucus and its relationship to the Millennial Action Project. And so there's like a two-part question here. Does each state have a future caucus? And with that, probably elaborate on what the Future Caucus is. And then is there a common policy platform, or does that differ from state to state?
Sure. So there is this national organization called the Millennial Action Project. And back in 2017, I was at a conference and saw someone from that group speak. And their sort of thesis for being is that if we can get the younger elected officials working together on issues that really matter, particularly to younger people, that will help us break down the partisan gridlock at the state and national level. And hopefully in 20 years when, state legislators and, the less junior members of Congress are sort of in more leadership positions, that will help have broken down some of the partisanship that exists right now. And that idea really resonated with me. there are, in Oregon at the time, there were only 8 legislators of 90 under the age of 42. The cutoff is generally 40 for forming these future caucuses, but we had to go up to 42 because if it had been 40, there would have only been handful of us.
Wow.
Yeah. And I just really, both the aspect of, creating a venue for working across party lines and the focus on sort of issues that are important to the younger generation, both of those aspects of future caucuses really resonated with me. Millennial Action Project has started these, they have a future caucus in Congress of the younger members of Congress. And then in about 30 states, they have state legislative future caucuses. And, in my experience, the Oregon legislature is a part-time job, as I referenced, sort of in quotes. It will easily be full-time if you let it, and this is I'm experiencing right now. And it tends to skew older because it's people who, the job also doesn't pay very much. So it's hard for mid-career people that have families or are mid-career in their jobs to be a part of the legislature. And so it's tended to skew older, people who are retired or who, have some more time in their life. And, so that meant that there weren't very many renters in the legislature. There weren't people who had gone through Oregon's education system after the passage of Measure 5. There's so much about the lived experience that people bring to the legislature that I thought was sort of important for the younger generation to bring as well. So, the everything about when I heard the presentation of what they were doing, I was really excited about and got to work organizing the other folks. And then we launched in 2018. So it's been not quite 2 years.
That's awesome. I was really excited when I saw that it was 42 and younger because I sit right on that cusp. And
Yeah.
I'm like, am I a millennial? And am I a Gen Xer? Am I in between? And it sounds like I still have no definitive answer after that, but I'm glad that we have younger people representing us. All right, so this one is interesting to get based on your private sector experience. So talent development and retention is one of the most important priorities for our tech member companies for a variety of reasons. And I think you can see that even spreading into manufacturing and agriculture. Like, there has to be some tech literacy that people are bringing to their jobs. And from your vantage point as a business and an HR consultant, and now a member of the Oregon House of Representatives Business and Labor Committee, what would you like to see the state do to strengthen and grow Oregon's tech workforce? And I am still going to caveat that with, it's not just software developers working at tech companies. I mean, it is a much broader, job description, in our opinion, at TAO.
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of a tough question. I think it's pretty multifaceted. And I'd say the baseline in terms of what the state could and should be doing, relates to our education system. So the promotion of STEM careers and CTE programs in high school is sort of the baseline. If you're not doing that well, that's what, as a state, we should focus on. Now, we had a ballot measure a few years ago, ballot measure 98, that redirected some investment into CTE programs in high schools. And so that was a great first start. The legislature passed the Student Success Act last year, which more fully funded our education system and specifically directed more money towards CTE kind of programs and STEM careers. So that's the first thing, is that in middle and high school, getting kids excited about STEM careers and learning about them and having some real world experience. There are lots of great organizations. I'm from Eugene. I represent West Eugene and parts of Lane County, Junction City. And there's great work being done by organizations in Lane County, Connected Lane County, promoting STEM and giving kids real world experience. So that's kind of the baseline. You have to prepare, your education system has to prepare the workforce. There's sort of this more esoteric point, I think, about how to attract and retain younger people in particular into Oregon that might want to work in the tech sector. So there kind of needs to be like an ecosystem and a critical mass of talent, I think, for that to happen. You need to sort of create a fun reason for people, a fun place to live. So I think there's one of Oregon's strength is sort of our quality of life. I'm answering this question, pretending like we're not in a pandemic right now, by the way.
Yeah, totally, 100%.
Not quite sure Oregon has a fun quality of life right at this moment, but I think that is really important. It sounds sort of silly for a public policy person to be talking about that, but think about Austin. Think about places that you can create this sort of self-sustaining mass of people that want to stay and work and live in this environment. And so again, in Eugene, I think there's been great work of creating community around the tech sector, so that people feel like they belong and there's an ecosystem for them to live in. In my private sector work, I worked for a big tech company in LA. And even in LA, they were having a hard time attracting and retaining folks because, it was particularly developers, getting them down from the Bay Area, because they were sort of the only game in town from the larger tech company perspective. And if someone's didn't work out, there wasn't many other places for them to go. So people were sort of risk averse to move there. So I'm not quite sure what the state can do to promote that kind of quality of life ecosystem, other than like investing in organizations that help to build that. Anyway, that's a multifaceted answer, but you look around at some of the success stories, like why did Silicon Valley become what it was? Why is Austin, a hub now? So learning from those experiences, I think, can help us figure out how to move forward.
Well, and I'll be curious to see, and then this just brings up more policy questions in my opinion, but I'll be curious to see as we come out and when we come out of this pandemic and the ability to work from anywhere, particularly at tech companies, and tech companies seem to be the leaders in telling people to not come back to work. Will you see a remote workforce be more of a reality in certain industries, and do more rural parts of states where people have access to hiking and fishing and camping and those things that make living in Oregon so wonderful become draws? And then do we have the infrastructure from a broadband standpoint to make that a reality? And would that be a retention and a recruitment strategy? And the answer to that is perhaps, because to your point, like, if it doesn't work out, like, what's your next job? And we may see a shift there. So that'll be interesting to see. Now, I thought your answer was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, broadband in particular, particularly in the pandemic, focusing quite a bit on, the state has made some significant investments this year in obviously that's a longer term prospect, but in trying to build out broadband. And interestingly, my husband and I are actually sort of case studies for what you just talked about in terms of, we both, in our 20s, we lived in Chicago, and he worked from home for a company in Florida, and I started a business and kind of grew it to the point where I could work from home. And so we could kind of live wherever we wanted, and we chose Oregon.
Yeah.
And we've been here 12, 13 years. And we moved, and I loved it. My experience was great. And he, entered the Great Recession and ended up losing his job. So the only game in town piece was a little challenging, but I think we were trendsetters in that way, in terms of we can work from wherever we want. And Oregon's quality of life is really what drew us here.
Yeah, I mean, and it's affordable if you are a technologist, in a way that the Bay and Boston and New York and even Chicago aren't. So, okay, so we kind of started touching on this with the broadband initiatives, but what would you like to see from the region's tech industry when it comes to your policy priorities? Like, what can we be bringing to you from our 450 plus members? And I've heard upwards of 6,000 tech organizations statewide. Like, what is it that we can be bringing to the state legislator from a policy standpoint that you think helps build our innovation economy?
What is it that you can bring to me? I have sort of a slightly different answer for that, in terms of that brings the tech, that builds the tech economy. So, when I was thinking about this question, I cannot tell you how many times that I have said, I want to do X. X is a great policy. It's a thing the state should be doing to help support Oregonians. And what X involves is the use of some software system somewhere in state government that is not very adaptable and can't make the change. It would cost, $500,000 to make this seemingly simple change. And so then I can't do it. And so it's literally everywhere. It comes up, at least every week that the state just does not do technology very well. And so everything from the automatic expungement of past cannabis convictions, I had that conversation about that yesterday, and how technology is an impediment. One of my bills, I had a high school student bring me a bill a couple years ago about an optional donation at the DMV to support organ donation education. That's how most states fund organ donation education. And so we went to the DMV and said, hey, can we do this? And it required a change to their pretty antiquated systems that was going to cost a ridiculous amount of money. And we decided to wait until they updated their software system, which they have now.
Wow.
So it's just such an impediment to actually getting things done. And I worry, we had the Cover Oregon debacle, 8-10 years ago.
Yeah.
And we've put in place all these processes to make sure that doesn't happen again. But sometimes they get in the way of actually updating and changing our technology. And obviously the most current version of that is the failure of the employment department and their software to get unemployment benefits out.
Yeah. Wow. That's so interesting that the tech that should be enabling is actually becoming an impediment and a detractor of potentially interesting and cool policy moving forward. Oh, wow. See, now you got my nerdy brain going, because I was a software developer for many years. I cannot touch it anymore. That would be a debacle in and of itself. Okay. So we're getting close. I've got 2 more questions for you. So the second to last one is, we have a lot of young civic-minded professionals within the local tech community. It's very inspiring to see actually how interested in advocacy our community members are. So what advice would you give them if they want to get more involved in public service?
I think the biggest piece of advice is to start local. We obviously have a presidential election going on this year, and national level politics gets a lot of attention, not just in the last few years, but generally. I mean, I would say people who feel like they are interested in politics and policy mostly think about the national level. But I sort of got started more in the local, in my own community realm, and I can't emphasize enough like how much of a difference one person can actually make at the local level. It's hard to make a difference at the national level as one person, but in your own city, in your own county, if you communicate with your elected officials, if you sit on a budget board or the planning commission, those are really important, not just ways to build your own experience in government, but to make a contribution at the local level. And in terms of advocacy as well, I read all my emails. So if you email Senator Merkley or Senator Wyden, I think that's useful for sure, but they may not read all their emails. I don't know. Maybe they read a sampling of them like President Obama did. But I read my email, and if you email me, particularly if it's a constituent, some local idea for a bill, I mentioned the organ donation piece, or your position on a bill, particularly if it's not, one of the big top things that we're working on. I have oftentimes learned from my constituents and voted for or against a bill because of their advocacy, or brought something forward because constituent had a great idea. And so that would really be my advice to people, is start local. And up to including the state legislature.
I love that advice. That was my approach too. So I'm from the East Coast. I grew up in Atlanta, and I was super involved in my neighborhood. And people were like, you could do so much more. And I'm like, yeah, but in my neighborhood, like I know I can get trash cans installed. Like I know in a 4-block radius that I can actually influence that, and then it's cleaner and then it looks better. And so I think that's such an interesting approach to take, because it's the one that works, and then you get to see progress, because otherwise it's incredibly frustrating, I think, for folks to be involved in the political machine, because it takes a long time for things to change. And that's a way to get like a quick win.
That's one of the things I love about the state legislature specifically, is that I feel like I can actually make change.
Yeah.
You know, if at federal level politics, I'm not so sure even one congressperson how much of an impact they can really have. And for me, I feel like all the time I'm the fact that I am where I am means that I can get more done.
Well, I shouldn't ask this question, but I'm going to. Do you think it's because you spend less time on Twitter and more time actually in your community and working on policy?
Maybe that might
Maybe. All right. Our last question, as I've dealt with both the dog barking and the cat walking across my screen, we've spent a lot of time in the last 150-ish days, I feel like, in these type of online meetings. So what's your funniest online conferencing mishap that you've seen in recent weeks, either with your private sector work, your public sector work, with your family or your broader network, or even a viral video that you've loved watching? What has been the funniest in this world for you?
I'm going to give you all a lesson about politics, which is that the first rule of doing media interviews is that you don't answer the question you've been asked. You answer the question that you wish you were asked.
Okay, perfect.
So you asked me for the funniest situation on Zoom, and I'm going to talk about the funnest thing I've done on Zoom.
Okay, perfect, good.
Which is that a few weeks ago we had a virtual talent show with friends and their kids, and so it was really fun. We have this trip we do every year to the beaches in North Carolina, and it with a number of different families, and it ends with a talent show. And since we couldn't do the trip, we did the virtual talent show, and there were piano playing and singing and ukuleles and dance routines from some of the kids. And it was really fun. I would highly recommend it if you're needing to connect with people in other parts of the country, or even in Oregon, since we're still in a pandemic.
I like that. But now I have to know, like, what's your talent? What did you bring to the table?
So I play the trumpet, not very much anymore. And I kicked us off with the Star Spangled Banner. So.
Okay. I mean, that's just perfect. I love that. That's wonderful. Well,
the extra benefit of it is that it's much less intimidating as an adult to perform your musical talent to a screen than it is to do it in front of, real life humans. So
that's fair. And then I'm going to give you the converse. I have young nieces, they're 3 and 7. And we do generally like a tea party in person, which we have not been able to do. And so the first time we did that via Zoom, my 7-year-old niece was adamant that she poured the tea herself from my mom's like tea service from the 70s. And like the fact that I couldn't reach through the screen and help her, and my heart is like pounding, and I'm like, oh my God, it's hot. And what if she drops it? And what if she breaks it? But she's learning new things, and it all worked out just fine. So all those learning opportunities. Thank you so much for giving us your time this morning. I know y'all are busy. You're getting ready to roll into a second special session, and we really appreciate everything that you're doing with your perspective as we navigate a pandemic, an economic crisis, and a lot of equity questions moving forward. Thanks for representing the folks in the Southern Willamette Valley, and I hope you have a really great weekend.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
This is fun. We'll talk to you real soon.
Okay, bye.
All right, take care. Bye.